New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And you can always listen to the show, of course, later on in the week, on Friday nights when we're on a host of other networks. You can also follow us on iTunes, on TuneIn, and on Stitcher. And we'll get a few more of those going up as well, but those are all up right now. And, of course, if you want to support me and the work that I do, you can always go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can become a subscriber for the low introductory price of $1 a month, which gets you, of course, access to the bonus podcast as well as all sorts of other things, including early access to the a soon-to-be-released episode of Clandestine, where I spoke with our good friend Tom Secker all about one of our new favorite shows, or definitely one of our favorite shows of the year, American Vandal, which is a Netflix original. And I also want to thank Curtis for becoming a patron of mine on Patreon. So thank you, Curtis. We have limited time with our guest for today, who is our good friend and frequent guest on the show, Tom Secker. So I won't babble on too much. Tom, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Pierce. I'm good. And I'm looking forward to talking to you tonight because, yeah, like you say, that episode on American Vandal that's like the, that's like the good side of Netflix, if you like.
Yes.
Whereas what we're going to be talking about tonight is very much the ugly side of Netflix. So it kind of ties in.
Yeah, it does. You've alluded to Netflix as our sort of our topic for this, and you pointed this out to me the other day. I actually had no idea. I was completely in the dark about this. I'm still recovering from my cold. I think I sound better than I did last week, which was again big thanks to Robbie Martin and Ed Opperman for coming on such short notice. I was not feeling too good, so thank you guys. But Tom, you pointed this out to me, that Netflix is set to produce, or they're already they're already filming, a dramatic film, a retelling of Anders Behring Breivik and the Oslo and Utoya Island attacks. It's, of course, written and directed by Paul Greengrass, who I'm sure we'll get into. And I don't know if you saw this, Tom, but it's produced by Scott Rudin.
Oh, there's a surprise.
Yeah, I know. Which is someone that Tom and I have talked about, at length on the CIA in Hollywood. I mean, Scott Rudin produces everything, and he is a good producer. I mean, most of the movies and Broadway shows, Book of Mormon and other things that he touches are generally good. But of course, I was, that did pique my interest a little bit, that it's directed by Paul Greengrass and produced by Scott Rudin. Tom, I don't know, give us a little bit of background on this project, which I think the working title is just Norway or something like that. But give us a little bit of background information on it.
I don't know a huge amount about it. I only stumbled across this a few days ago myself, but essentially it's a drama that, as far as we can tell, is going to tell the story of the run-up to the kind of, the gestation of the attack that Anders Behring Breivik perpetrated in, was it July 2011?
Yes.
I want to say July 22nd, 2011. And this was the bombing in downtown Oslo outside the government building, and then the shooting massacre on the island of Utoya, where it was like the Youth Labour Party were having their summer retreat, their sort of summer getaway. And he ended up murdering dozens and dozens of teenagers, young people, just kids really, a lot of them. And yeah, I mean, the most astonishing thing for me, as far as I know about the background of this film, is that it's actually to some extent being sponsored by the Norwegian government. It's said in these articles that they've claimed maybe the equivalent of $2 million in tax credits from the Norwegian Film Foundation, or whatever the hell it is. The people
Film Institute.
Right, the people you go to. So when you're filming in a foreign country, one of the things you can claim is a certain amount of your production costs back on the grounds that you're employing local people and spending money in the local economy and blah, blah, blah. And so most countries, or at least most developed countries that have a bit of money to spend, have these institutes and these organizations set up so you can go to them and say, okay, if we're spending, whatever, $10 million, can we claim 20, 30% of that back in tax credits? So in effect, the Norwegian public, the Norwegian government, is sponsoring a film that you've got to think, normally when a country does this, it's to promote their country, right? It's for tourism and PR purposes. It's a kind of national PR. That's why, in Dubai, I think you can get like 40% of your money back. They're really keen to have filmmakers come and shoot in certainly in all of the Arab Emirate countries.
Mexico, right, with James Bond.
Yeah, with was it Skyfall, Spectre?
I think it's Spectre in Mexico City.
In this case, they're telling a story which is possibly the most horrible thing that's happened in Norway in the last, 20, 30 years.
It was the biggest World War II?
Certainly the biggest massacre since World War II, the biggest death in one single event since World War II. So why on earth would the Norwegian government be subsidizing this, except for the fact that, who makes films in Norway? Who makes films about Norway? Hardly anyone. So it's like, I doubt that the Norwegian Film Institute gets a huge number of requests from, big Hollywood producers working for Netflix. So I can only assume they just sort of went along with it.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I would, I don't know, my tinfoil hat theory for that, which maybe we'll get into, is that, I'm sure that they see some sort of benefit in making a movie that will, I think rightfully so, depict Breivik as a lunatic, and, sort of warn us of the dangers of the far right. And we've seen that, there's another sort of, push for that. Like here in the U.S., there's soon to be what I can only assume will be a piece of shit, but a television miniseries about Waco, with Michael Shannon, John Leguizamo, some big name people. But of course, that Koresh was a psycho, that, I'm sure they will link it to the alt-right, and that this speaks for the whole right-wing movement, and, well, the fire that the federal government started, was an accident, or, I'm sure there'll be all sorts of little things, that will be designed to demonize, the Branch Davidians, and all of the people, including tons of children that were burned to death, in an event that could have been solved, of course, amicably.
Oh yeah.
Just like Ruby Ridge or any of these things. But so I think there's a bit of a push for that kind of a thing, or I can see them, want to, for instance, well, let's get into Paul Greengrass, because I read, I think it was in Deadline, .com or DeadlineLive.com. They had a whole, article sort of talking about how this is like a passion project for Greengrass, like everything he gets involved with. And he wrote and directed this. And this is like a big deal for him. And I can totally see Greengrass having a bit of a political agenda. We've got to talk about these things. And I'm sure, of course, he's going to skip over all the interesting bits about Brevik and about the response and whatnot. But I mean, for people that don't know, Tom, I mean, why are we so interested in the fact that Paul Greengrass is connected to this?
Well, I mean, he's got a long history of making films about terrorism, for one thing. And going back to the early days, he had some involvement in the Spycatcher controversy. You may remember this very explosive book written by a apparently former MI5 officer in the 1980s. But since then, Greengrass has been surprisingly pro-establishment for someone who kind of, got his break into the big world of media that way. And he made films about Northern Ireland. He obviously made United 93. He directed 2 of the original Bourne trilogy. Am I right in saying that?
And I think he was attached to the other ones.
Yeah, I think he's sort of worked as in a production role, producer role on some of the others as well. So this is a guy who's worked with, CIA, DOD, probably Ministry of Defense in this country. He's a bit of an establishment lackey as far as filmmakers go. Not an untalented filmmaker, I will say. I don't think any of these films are sort of bad films in terms of, the craft that has gone into them. In some ways, United 93 is a huge creative success because it's telling a story that at that point was still very raw emotionally, and that a lot of people were like, should you really be making films about 9/11 this soon after 9/11? But he did it in a way that actually audiences responded very well to. And so I'm just saying from that point of view, the guy clearly knows what he's doing. But then you get into, well, okay, but why is it that in, say, the final half hour of United 93, they never cut back to the Air Force?
Yeah.
So what were the Air Force doing for that final half hour before that plane went down? Because the last thing we really saw of them was the FAA. Sorry to get into the details about this.
No, go ahead.
It's a film I've obsessed over a bit. The last point, effectively, that we see with the military is where the FAA tells the military liaison at FAA headquarters, where they're dealing with all this, they tell them about Flight 93, and this is before the Pentagon is struck. So that's like over half an hour. That's more like 40 minutes, 45 minutes. But what were the Air Force doing that whole time? And we found out from the Entertainment Liaison Office reports that that I found on an old website. These weren't the ones I got under FOIA. These were earlier ones. That actually in the course of researching this film, and with the assistance of the Air Force, obviously, they actually spoke to people who said that they were tracking the plane. They spoke to pilots, flying fighters, tracking that plane, United 93. Why didn't that make it into the film, do you wonder? They knew about it. We know they knew about it. That's, that's not something they can dispute. It's in the Air Force's own bloody documents. So why for the last half hour of that film is there basically no mention of what the Air Force were doing? Because the whole thing is an elaborate kind of attempt to avoid that question of what the hell were the Air Force doing that morning and why? And what were they even really trying to accomplish? And as a piece of art, like I say, it's pretty compelling stuff. As a piece of political propaganda, it's extraordinary and horrible. So that's who Paul Greengrass is to me.
Oh, yeah, and just to jump back into United 93 briefly, I would say most people's historical recollection of United 93 isn't coming from the 9/11 Commission. It's not coming from the mainstream media. It's really coming from this film, which is, but for the most part, is really a piece of fiction. The whole let's roll, the whole sort of narrative of what is supposed to have happened on that plane, how the government responded to that plane, all those sorts of things are really coming directly from a Hollywood filmmaker, not from the 9/11 Commission, not from the eyewitnesses in Shanksville that said some sort of differing opinions about the lack of a plane. There is no plane.
The lack of a plane, where the plane went down, whether there was an explosion in the sky before the plane came down, whether there was a sound of Air Force jets flying around, firing missiles at the plane before the plane went down. All of this sort of stuff has cropped up in different witness reports. I mean, how much weight we put on those, well, that's not something we can get into right now, I don't think. But the point is, the film avoids all that massively and in a really kind of clunky and obvious way when you know about it and when you watch the film critically. So I guess we can expect the Brevik story to do much the same thing. We'll have to wait and see, but yeah, I think you're right. I don't think that's tinfoil hat at all to say that this is what Greengrass does. So this is what we can expect him to do again.
Well, and so the Netflix film, as is being reported in entertainment media and stuff, it's going to focus on three sort of sub stories. One is going to be a survivor that I think on Utoya Island that's adjusting to living through something horrible like that. Then it's going to be Jens Stoltenberg and other politicians. Stoltenberg, of course, was the the prime minister at the time and is now the head of NATO.
Yep.
We can speculate about how he got that job.
That particular transition, yes.
Yeah. And then it's going to be Breivik's lawyers, I guess, trying to give him a fair trial and whatnot. But I mean, just sort of looking at that, and again, going off of Greengrass's sort of credentials as basically a government lackey. I can assume there's going to be lots of things left out. I mean, what are some? Here's a big one, Tom, and I know you're not going to be able to answer this. So you can give me a soundbite on this. But I mean, was Breivik a part of a rebirth of old-fashioned Gladio? Was he working for the state? Was this was he sort of a so-called self-radicalized right-wing nationalist? I mean, those are the big things that I would assume you and I would be interested to know in a documentary or in a dramatic film about Breivik. But I mean, is that something that will probably be avoided?
I'm guessing that will be avoided. I'm guessing what they will do is, in as much as they will get into Breivik, it will be a psychological portrayal. It probably won't really get into his politics, even though this is someone who, at least as far as we can tell, left a video and a 1,000-odd page manifesto explaining why he did it, and which is full of, frankly, all kinds of stuff which has become immensely popular in the years since then. And I always wondered, I said this at the time, and nothing that's happened since then causes me to reassess this. I wondered if the audience, if you like, for this terrorist attack, the target, because let's not forget, as per CIA documents, the purpose of a terrorist attack, the target isn't the people you kill. The target is the people watching it on television. So I wonder, what was the point of all this? Was the point to attack left-wing Norwegians, some kids at some lefty youth camp in the summer? Or was it, in fact, to target, if you like, the right wing across the whole of Western Europe, and to try and embolden them, and to try to say to them, maybe don't go this far, but you can be a lot more bold in what you say? And that's something that we've seen in the 5 or 6 years since then, is a much more emboldened and vocal hard right wing, both in the US and here. So I wondered about that, and if it is, that fits in with the Gladio strategy for certain, but there's no straightforward evidence connecting Breivik to the state. I mean, there are the question of so-called intelligence failures. He does turn up on a couple of investigations prior to the attacks that
that's right.
Certainly should have maybe gone further. Certainly you'd expect so in a country like Norway, which has no terrorism. It's not like they've got hundreds of people they've got to keep an eye on.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Norwegian security services don't have a lot to do, not to put too fine a point on it. But so I expect all of that will be missing. There is the question, as I've pointed out, of Breivik referring to Gladio in his manifesto, and therefore was this a kind of self-activated lone Gladio, if you'll let me use that phrase, a guy who knew about Gladio, knew about these strategies, knew how to work the strategy of tension via a terrorist attack, via an act of mass violence, and thought, I'm going to have a go at that, completely independently of the state. That's always possible, that he was a kind of Gladio copycat. It's also possible he was in some way working for the state, but not even the Norwegian state. Because like I say, if the target wasn't really Norway and the Norwegian people and government, who actually responded quite admirably compared to most governments and publics and how they respond to terrorist attacks, if the target was a more like pan-Western European thing, then would we not actually be looking for a connection between Breivik and, say, MI6, CIA, NATO intelligence, something like that? I've not seen evidence of that. I'm just saying from my analysis of what happened and the kind of legacy of the Breivik attack, that's where my suspicions and my kind of thinking, that's the direction I'd go in.
Oh, I would kind of second that too. Like you said, so much of Breivik's personality has now been sort of parroted by all sorts of people on the far right. his manifesto, I don't suggest anybody try and read the whole thing, but if you just read the highlights, it is basically like, word for word what, the far right, not even the far right, just the sort of, the alt-right, however you want to define that. It sounds just like them about the immigrants, the Muslims, women. Yeah, exactly.
Liberal academics, liberal media, the whole thing. Yeah, it's all in there. All of the talking points. Yeah. Exactly,
yeah. And I'll add another thing that there's always sort of, maybe he was like a self, he did it himself. He was a self-radicalized Gladio agent. And I don't know if you want to comment on this, Tom, but he's also a Freemason, which of course made me think of the Italian Gladio. And their connection to the Freemasons there. And he went on and on about how he was one of the Knights Templar as well. Again, crusading against the Muslims,
the rampaging Middle Eastern hordes or whatever whatever these people believe.
Yeah. And I'm not, I'm not trying to go too off the rails into, the Knights Templar and those sorts of conspiracies and stuff, but it does make you wonder. Again, too, with the Freemason stuff, of course, the Masons in Norway claim, we didn't really know him, blah, blah, blah. And I don't quite buy into that. Again, you're talking about it is possible, I guess. But Breivik, for the most part, was fairly vocal about his beliefs, his political beliefs. And if he ever, I don't know, I would assume if he said this to a Mason, again, you're talking about the, Freemasons in Norway. how many are there? With the intelligence services and all that kind of stuff. And again, too, the Masons, by and large, there are a lot of Masons that are always connected to government. So it does make you wonder. Nobody saw this guy. And all of that, of course, just sort of fits into this narrative. And it's odd to see that Breivik is kind of like not like a hero of the far right, but he's certainly not demonized the way like Timothy McVeigh is, even in the U.S. This, in spite of McVeigh's rhetoric and all these sorts of things, and there definitely were far right groups that supported McVeigh. He is kind of toxic. You don't see a lot of people kind of quoting McVeigh or anything like that, or looking to him, and maybe that is because he probably was he was a government agent. But with Breivik, we don't really see that. He's kind of, I don't know. I would assume, in some circles, he is a hero. I don't know. You want to talk about that at all, Tom?
Yeah. In some circles, I'm absolutely certain he is. But it's, I guess for a lot of people, it's more like, because they've been bombarded with this stuff about, Muslims invading, Muslims killing and blowing things up and what have you, it just seemed like it was inevitable that sooner or later some, violent ultra-right winger would go and take out a bunch of people in response. But even that is kind of that's much more of an emotional narrative. It's just a sort of, they hit us, so we hit them kind of thing. Because Breivik didn't kill any Muslims.
Oh, of course not. No.
or at least if he did, that wasn't because they were Muslim. That was just because they were the people who happened to be on the island and he shot them. He attacked who he saw as the political left who let this happen. That's how he conceived of it. And it's very much that idea that seems to have echoed, and that seems to have had a lot of resonance, is that, if you look at the alt-right in particular, who are they more angry against? Are they more angry against immigrants, or are they more angry against the left for allowing all the immigrants to come in and do whatever it is they think the immigrants have done?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, they're more angry towards the political left. They're the real enemy. They're the real people you've got to hate, is those other people in our country who've, betrayed our race or something, betrayed our homeland, betrayed our heritage, all the rest of it, betrayed our culture. That's a big one.
They sold us out.
The lefties have destroyed our culture because they, want to bring in all these women and these brown people. And as kind of pathetic and stupid as all of that is, not enormously popular, but popular enough to get a fair amount of media coverage these days. And it's that idea, perhaps more than any other, that is the legacy of the Brevik attack. And that fits in perfectly with Gladio. Get the domestic right and the left to be completely polarized, destroy the middle ground, destroy any possibility of reconciling or resolving some of these arguments and conflicts, and just drive them against each other. And so both end up turning to the state saying, oh, we need to do something. It's Gladio. Whether that was, the plan all along, I don't know, but that's certainly the way it's played out.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's, more evidence that, Gladio didn't evolve into something else, but that it always it's continued on. And certainly, the Gladio that we're describing here, through the use of far right, groups and people, in order to attack the left, that is Gladio. No amount of, screaming on YouTube about it being something else is going to make it true. That is how it exists today, and always has. Quickly, Tom, because I know, I don't want to keep you too long, but, we mentioned before, Jens Stoltenberg, I made a bit of an off comment. He's now head of NATO. When he became head of NATO, Christoph German and I both kind of chuckled and said, well, of course he is, because of Breivik, and for his leal service during that whole thing. Of course, Stoltenberg went, and it's not to belittle the prime ministership of Norway, but come on, it is you're prime minister of Norway. I mean, what does that really qualify you to later in life? I mean, I don't know. I guess a nice Norwegian guy. But now he is, of course, head of NATO. And keep in mind too, Stoltenberg is the liberal. He was the person that Breivik was sort of, hated. Maybe not quite to the extreme, that Breivik was talking about with the left, but certainly Stoltenberg represented the more sort of liberal, equality for women and trans and gay, and we need more immigrant, all the stuff that Breivik kind of hates, embodied in Stoltenberg. And then Stoltenberg goes on to become, of course, the head of NATO, which is, in spite of their own propaganda and stuff, is not a progressive institution, that, supports human rights or anything like that. And I don't know, it just, anything on that, because it always struck me that this was Stoltenberg's sort of, whether this is, whether or not there was a larger plan at play, and Stoltenberg was in on it, or if he was sort of let in on it, or maybe it was just sort of, well, this happened and now here's your, thanks, for it. You're going to be head of NATO. Any comment on that at all?
Well, getting into some slightly speculative territory, if the scenario that I suggested before is true, where some kind of outside intelligence agency or what have you sponsored this attack and that Breivik was somehow their tool, was Stoltenberg's, mission, or at least the thing that he had to avoid, was the investigation looking outward? Because that was never something that was considered at the time. It was always, did he, or at least if it was, did he have a connection to some wider right-wing movement in Europe? Because there were stories about him meeting with right-wingers in this country and that kind of thing.
Oh, the English Defence League, right?
Yeah, stuff like that. So, that was as far as they went in terms of looking abroad. It was never that this might have been a foreign state. Even Russia, they never suggested that, which now these days you'd sort of think if there was a big right-wing terrorist attack in Europe, sooner or later they'd get around to theorizing that Russia was somehow behind it, wouldn't they? So I guess that was the thing they had to avoid looking at. The question wasn't really, did the Norwegian intelligence services fail to stop this? It's, were they ever even looking for something like that to happen? Were they ever even suspecting that a foreign intelligence service might get hold of one of their far right wingers and turn him into a terrorist? So, in as much as this is, it seems, a reward for Stoltenberg to be given this massive promotion, I mean, head of NATO, that kind of sets you up for life. that means once you retire, you can spend the rest of your life consulting to various foreign policy and security policy think tanks for massive sums of money. So it's a much better job than Norwegian Prime Minister. We're being a little bit disrespectful here, but we're not trying. Honestly, we're not trying to be. It's just true. It is. On the world stage, it's a much bigger job. It's a much more important and respected job, and one that after you've done it, you'll have people queuing up to ask your opinion on all sorts of things that you know nothing about. So, perfect for a career politician.
Right. So, of course, no disrespect to the Norwegian listeners and politicians in Norway listening right now. We'd love to hear your opinions on this, but of course, it's you're Prime Minister of Norway. That's it. Whereas former head of NATO, as you said, Tom, you can get speaking gigs and things like that. Even in a more sort of extreme cynical level, you don't even have to do that. If you just, as head of NATO, if you invade a bunch of countries, and reshape them and whatever. I mean, you look at people like Wesley Clark and others, and the stuff that went on in the Balkans. I mean, they invaded countries and now, streets are named after them. Madeleine Albright owning telecommunications all over Kosovo. That's not like an accident. That wasn't like savvy business planning. She helped destroy the country and put in place her proxies, and now she, owns a huge stake in their, cell phone industry. So Stoltenberg could even do something like that, of course. I
guess it depends how corrupt he is.
Of course. Yes.
And I don't quite know the answer to that. As a former Norwegian Prime Minister, he's probably not quite as corrupt as Madeleine Albright, but
no.
Nonetheless, he is head of NATO, so he's got to be a bit corrupt, hasn't he? So, it's all relative.
Oh, yeah, of course. And it's also just sort of laughable, like Norway. I mean, who's threatening them? Why are they even part of NATO? You know what I mean? Like, why? Like, it just sort of always just strike. The sort of like I don't know, the reach that NATO has now. It's like Norway. It's like they want Finland to become like a full member of NATO. It's like, what's going to happen to Finland? I really just don't think Russia's going to invade them. It's not World War II. There's not going to be the Winter War. And then beyond that, I mean, who the hell wants to attack Finland? Can anyone out there listening even name another city besides Helsinki in Finland? I mean, what's the target? I wouldn't even know. And although there's like a weird thing, not to get too sort of inside baseball with NATO, but there is like a trend with having these like Scandinavian leaders, because before Stoltenberg was what's his name, much more of a right winger from Denmark, I forget, but former Prime Minister of Denmark.
I know the guy you mean. His name escapes me too. But
yes.
You're right. It's because they're kind of like the acceptable face of fascism.
Yeah, exactly. No, of course. Yeah, because they're Scandinavian.
They're good. Yeah. People like Scandinavians because, who's ever got pissed off with Scandinavians? I mean, they're quite nice people. Those countries don't tend to go around invading other countries or really, fucking other people's business up. So on the whole, and frankly, from the Scandinavians I've met, they are mostly pretty likable people, at least as far as I know. So I get it. I get why it's good PR. It's kind of like when they put a nice sort of 40-ish blonde woman in charge of the police and MI5 in this country. It kind of, it sort of makes it look a bit more friendly. I don't know why.
Yeah, no,
I don't know why people think like that. But, it seems that the personality and the demographics of the person, the symbol, the public face that you put in charge of these things does make quite a difference because they keep doing it. And it, to be fair, keeps working for them. I mean, who the hell is all that aggressive towards NATO? It's ridiculous. You've got all these countries saying, maybe we should leave the EU. And much as I hate the EU, frankly, the Brexit process, not going well.
I was just watching this morning. Theresa May looks like she's going to have another thick of it moment, isn't she?
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's not going to last till the next election, that's for sure. like I say, much as I hate the EU and can understand countries wanting to leave, have a bit of sense about how you go about that would be my only statement from the British experience. But who wants to leave NATO? Who's having a referendum on leaving NATO? And like you say, instead they're trying to, bring in other nations. And just as a final point on this, the last time Norway was invaded, to my knowledge, was World War II. And what they did was, rather than destroy their country fighting with the Nazis, they said, okay, we'll sort of let this happen and not really fight you over this, and maybe quietly liaise with British intelligence so we can sort of work against you on the sly. And they now have the highest GDP per capita in the world.
Yeah.
And certainly in Europe, they have a very nice country for themselves that they didn't destroy in World War II. So why on earth they're members of NATO, and what scenario they think will require the protection of other NATO countries? I'm not really sure, because, in all honesty, they got invaded in World War II and it didn't work out that badly for them. Certainly when you compare most of the other countries that the Nazis invaded.
Oh, yeah, totally. No, yeah, definitely. I was going to say that kind of reminds me when Sweden was invaded by the Nazis, and the Nazi regime was okay, hand over the lists of all the Jews, and who was it? It was the king of Sweden basically said no, and then that was it. And then the Nazis were like, "What do you mean no?" And he said, "No, I'm not doing it." And and this is not to say that there were no people that were killed in Sweden, but it was certainly lessened. And that's just, a guy with a bit of a backbone. The Nazis weren't able to, implement mass executions, because, somebody sort of stood up to them. So,
it does show you that there are other ways of dealing with these problems, that you don't need to be part of some fascist transatlantic military alliance full of nuclear weapons. There are other options on the table. That's the takeaway from this, I guess.
No, absolutely. And I was just going to say, it's Anders Fogh Rasmussen.
That's
was
the guy.
the 39th Prime Minister of Denmark and the 12th Secretary General of NATO. And I don't know quite what he's doing right now. Oh, no, I'm sorry. He's got Rasmussen Global, which provides support on issues regarding security policy, transatlantic relations, the European Union, Brexit, and economic development. So, God only knows how much money that's raking in. And he's an unofficial or a non-staff advisor to Poroshenko in Ukraine, and he wrote a book. And I would assume Rasmussen is doing quite well for himself. Quickly, Tom, before I let you go, two things. One, I wanted to say that we're going to be finishing our trilogy on House of Cards, the British version, not the Kevin Spacey one, tomorrow. And anything you want to kind of plug to the listeners about that? I'm very excited to be doing it with you.
Well, just that, as with the first two episodes we did on the first two seasons, this third one, perhaps even more so, is rooted in real-world politics in a way that, everyone always says, the American House of Cards and they had Pussy Riot on it, blah, blah, blah. We're not talking about stuff like that. We're not talking about, stupid little talking points in the media that they wove into a script. We're talking about either real events or parallels of real events portrayed in an extremely realistic way. I really think that in terms of a basic political education that you can get from television, which you can get some, the British House of Cards is about as good as it gets. And it's been fascinating doing this review series with you for subscribers. It's a great series. It's a great topic. We've got into some fascinating areas and some stuff that, we hadn't even really thought about before we started doing this series. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the third chapter and to finishing this one off.
Oh yeah, no, so am I. And so anyone out there, and this will be there's a lot of wonderful things in this final part that dealing with geopolitics and stuff like that, which we haven't seen thus far. So again, if anybody wants to listen to this, they can always sign up on Patreon. And Tom, quickly, anything from you in the works? I was just saying before we went on the air, I really enjoyed your episode recently on the not being able to film at Langley anymore. But anything you've got in the pipeline that you want to plug?
Oh yeah. I mean, like you said, we've got this episode on American Vandal, which will be out next weekend. This weekend. Sorry, I keep losing track of these things. I've pretty much just finished work on a big episode on the FBI in Hollywood that goes all the way back to the 1930s and brings it all the way up to the present day. And I've compiled a lot of different information from different sources. And also weird stuff. Like I found this clip from CBS about an undercover cop. He was like an undercover drug cop for 12 years who then joined the FBI as an undercover agent. And they sent him to a Hollywood acting school so that he could more realistically portray the fake Muslim that the Muslim that he was pretending to be in order to infiltrate this gang of, nobodies because they were doing whatever. Doing what the FBI do to Muslim nobodies in the US, which is set them up. Weird things like that. So that's going to be a big episode. And just this evening, actually, I've been working on what is going to look like quite a mammoth episode, to be honest, on the science and entertainment exchange, which is a part of this whole state Hollywood complex that hasn't had the attention it deserves. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I bet. Well, all stuff to look forward to. And we'll, as I said, we'll be talking tomorrow. Tom, thank you for joining us for most of the first hour here. And of course, you can find all of Tom's work at spyculture.com. And I hope you also, anyone out there, can become a subscriber of Tom's work, and you get, again, a subscriber podcast. You also get early access to episodes of Clandestine, and you've got some other perks as well, right, Tom?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's some other rewards there on Patreon. There's some other unique content. I just posted the other day a recording of an interview I did with Michael Morrissey, the guy who founded Muckrock, this big FOIA site. We had a very interesting chat, basically, on how to do FOIA research and, the sort of tips and techniques that I came up with along the way in terms of producing national security cinema and doing all the research for that. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff on there for subscribers.
Excellent. Well, Tom Secker, thank you for joining us, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, we'll talk tomorrow.
Excellent. So once again, everybody, that was Tom Secker of spyculture.com, although I'm sure you're all very familiar with Tom. He's, as a frequent guest on the show. So, as you can probably already tell, we only had Tom for, not even the full hour, but, I was able to squeeze more out of him, than I thought. He originally said 30 minutes, but as you can probably tell, as I said, I was a little under the weather. I was a little bit difficult, to kind of put together, a full episode this week, with guests and stuff like that. So Tom offered to kind of jump in, but I do have a general plan for the rest of the show. I'm going to be talking, it'll probably mostly be about the, political, purge that is, sort of over now, ostensibly in Saudi Arabia, but how that, is going to affect the political situation in Lebanon, the war in Yemen, this sort of battle between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I think I'm probably going to try and focus most of that in the second hour. And I've got quite a bit to say on that, and hopefully we'll mention a few other things here and there. But I thought, we're almost out of time in the first hour here, so we'll just sort of got some updates and things like that. So I know that most of you had stopped bugging me about the return of Porkins Great Game with Christoph Gehrman, my good friend, because I could kind of lashed out on some people for bugging me and asking me, and a lot of people sort of this assumption that either Christoph and I don't know, broke up or something, or that we weren't friends anymore, or that it was quote too much work for me doing the radio show, and so I stopped doing that with Christoph. That is, of course, all lies. I'm actually going to be talking to Christoph this Saturday. But aside from that, Christoph and I are basically all set to start recording again in December. So in just a few weeks. So that'll be a bit of an early Christmas present for everybody. Very excited to be doing that. As I said, I think I've mentioned this before, but we're probably going to be kind of changing the format a bit of the show. So I thought I'd kind of give you a little bit of a sense of that right now. But Christoph and I have been talking about the show and how we want to do it, and obviously what we want to cover. And I know that everyone is sort of super into or really liked that we were a bit of a niche a podcast in that we covered Central Asia and stuff. But, to be honest, there really is almost nothing going on in Central Asia of much importance at the current time right now as we stand. So Christoph and I are sort of going to be kind of shifting away from that a bit. I hope that doesn't upset anybody. We're going to be kind of fleshing it out a bit more and looking. We'll be focusing on probably more and more in the Middle East, a little bit more, or we always did, but focusing quite a bit in the Pakistan, Afghanistan area, and sort of changing it up a little bit, maybe not doing the kind of the old format of like 3 different news stories, from around Central Asia and the Caucasus. Because as I said, there's just like nothing going on. It's sort of quieted down. This is not to say that I'm not still following the politics and things like that in Central Asia. I still am, but frankly, it's like kind of boring. It's a lot of small reforms in Uzbekistan and some political infighting and things like that in Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan and stuff like that. But for the most part, there's really not much. I think, and I'm speculating here, but I think the sort of grand schemes that various world powers and whatnot had for Central Asia, they've kind of been decided. They've been done, and they've sort of gotten their way for the most part. And that's kind of it. So Christoph and I are going to be kind of shifting away from that a little bit. I think we're kind of more open to looking at things with a slightly bigger picture, and certainly looking at the sort of power struggles that are emerging right now, insofar as the U.S. not being the sort of the only world power or regional power in hotspots like the Middle East or South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan. So definitely looking, at the relationship, or the struggle between Russia and the United States, definitely Iran and the United States, all these sorts of things. And I think, hopefully, that'll kind of make the show a bit richer. It'll also make the show a bit more, you'll be able to kind of re-listen to the show and not feel as if, well, if I didn't read all, these 20 stories that, we link up in the show notes, then I'm not gonna be able to kind of understand this and whatnot. And I think, there is something to be said for being like too topical. And I think at times Christoph and I felt a little bit constrained by the format of that. Where we were, really kind of talking about, if you missed that episode, like a week later, if you went to listen to it, pretty much everything would be, not out of date, but, things had sort of changed and whatnot. And we want these shows to be a bit more, a show where you can really kind of go back and listen and really get an interesting perspective and analysis on things. So that's, that is happening, in spite of the rumors that Christoph and I were never going to be doing another one. I don't have a specific date, but Christoph assures me that December he will be ready to start doing something. So we're gonna look into that and we'll figure that out. And we'll probably have the first episode will be talking a bit more about the slightly new format and things like that, and we're going to tweak it. We'll see what's going on. And of course, if something big does happen in Central Asia, of course we're going to report on it. We're not just going to completely disregard what's going on there. But I know people are probably like, oh, but that's why I got into the show and whatnot. But I mean, if people want to point us to some stories that they think are important or interesting, I mean, Christoph and I will look at them and we'll see about it, but there just really isn't all that much going on there. So, that's kind of that. We'll have some more updates as we get closer to that. And then the, another, interesting update, is for, what will probably be next week's show, unless, I have to move some things around, but I'm going to be speaking tomorrow with, John Atack, who is an absolute legend in the Scientology watcher community, the Scientology research community. John Atack is a former Scientologist who was in Scientology for many, many years, and he wrote probably one of the two most important books in exposing Scientology. So one of them is, of course, Barefaced Messiah by Russell Miller, and the other one is John Atack's Piece of Blue Sky, or I believe the updated title is Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. A Piece of Blue Sky is probably the best book on Scientology in my opinion. It's so well researched. I mean, it almost reads as if it's like it's very much in the sort of structural style of like an academic book, although it is it's not it doesn't have an academic feel when you're reading the book. John has a wonderful way of writing and sort of describing these things, but it's that impeccably researched. Everything is sourced. Everything is he's got it down to a T, and it was a huge deal when the book was published. It was banned in the United Kingdom for many, many years, of course, through Scientology and their litigious nature. They were able to get this. But I mean, there's a ton more that we're going to get into with John, but very excited to have him on the show. And that was, of course, thanks to Jeffrey Augustine, a friend of the show who's been on I think now 3 or 4 times to talk about Scientology. So I'm going to have John Atack on, as I said. I think we're going to we'll probably have to pre-record. I'm not sure, but that'll probably be next week's show. But I'm really excited about that. So if anyone is listening right now, I don't know when exactly we're recording. It might be very soon. But if anyone has any questions or anything like that they would be interested in having John talk about on the show, then certainly email me when you can. And we'll try and fit them in to the show. So lots of cool stuff on the horizon, of course. And I will be doing at some point soon, probably in the next couple of weeks when South Park actually ends. But I'm going to be doing for the subscribers, I'm going to be doing a subscriber podcast with Chuck Ocelli, all about the recent season of South Park. This is season 21, and bit of a mixed bag so far. I've liked a lot of the season. There's some episodes that really just like it felt very much like Matt Stone and Trey Parker were kind of phoning it in, and I think that's probably just because they've got a lot on their plate. They had 2 new video games that they're very involved with in the making of these video games and doing all the voices and the writing. So I think that might have kind of reflected in a slightly weaker season, although there's still a bunch of episodes to come out. So I'm holding out that they will kind of deliver towards the tail end. But anyway, we are at the break right now. I will be joining you in the second hour to discuss the Saudi Purge and more, so stay tuned.
to the world's meeting place. American.
It's practically narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys because they have all the technology. They have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms. And American English is loaded with euphemisms because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it. I'll give you an example of that. When I was a little kid, if I got sick, they wanted me to go to the hospital and see the doctor. Now they want me to go to a health maintenance organization. Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that. The CIA doesn't kill anybody anymore. They neutralize people. The government doesn't lie. It engages in disinformation. Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists. Contra killers are called freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight? They never mention that part of it to us, do they? Never mention that part of it.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom, and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, rocket copy. 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are just joining me right now, in the first hour, we were joined with Tom Secker, and we were talking about this amazing production that Netflix is doing about Anders Behring Breivik and the Oslo and Utoya Island attack. So, of course, definitely check that out. I'm going solo here in the second hour, and I thought we would do some more sort of get back to our roots a little bit and talk some geopolitics and what's been going on. And there's been actually quite a few big events that have been happening in the past couple, or just in this past week alone. But and we'll see how many of them we actually are able to get to. But I have a feeling we're going to kind of fill up our time by talking about this purge that has been going on in Saudi Arabia and how it is sort of trickling out. So I think by now everyone should have heard that there was a purge in Saudi Arabia. Over 200 people have been arrested officially, although according to other sources and people on the ground and sources within the Saudi royal court, there's something maybe like 500 people have actually been arrested. Thousands have been detained for questioning. And this all stems from the anti-corruption crusade of the crown prince. This is Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Salman. Who's also known, he goes by this, the moniker, MBS. I might be referring to him as MBS. That's how he's known in a lot of the Arab world. But anyway, so this stems from his anti-corruption crusade, and he's frozen bank accounts of many of these people. Some of them are under house arrest. People will probably have seen these reports of many of the people rounded up in this crusade were being held in the Ritz-Carlton, and allegedly the Saudi government, I guess sent its goons over to the Ritz-Carlton. They made everybody that was in there leave. They basically took over the whole hotel and housed a bunch of these people that have been connected in this anti-corruption probe. And this anti-corruption probe is mainly focused on members of the royal family. Almost all of them, of course, are political rivals of Mohammed bin Salman. And also there's some people in the business community. I think it's Bakr bin Laden, who's I want to say half brother of Osama bin Laden, and he's the head of the bin Laden Group, which is this huge construction management company people will be familiar with. He was connected to this. There was Crown Prince Talwid, who is a billionaire. People will know him as he's sort of very vocal about his disdain for Donald Trump. They've gotten into Twitter battles and stuff. He was detained, as was, basically anyone else of any sort of major prominence or political power have all been swept up in MBS's anti-corruption probe, which is rich, of course, coming from him. We're talking about, I think he's maybe 32 years old or something like that. 32-year-old billionaire who's never had a real job, and everything has basically been handed to him, and he's as corrupt as the rest of them. Now, I have seen reports in the Middle East Eye, and I think that's about it, that Bandar Bush, Prince Bandar, who's known as Bandar Bush because he's so close to the Bush family, that he was also targeted in this corruption probe and that he had been arrested. I haven't seen this really confirmed anywhere else, so I would take it with a grain of salt. And also, Bandar Bush is very prominent in the Saudi royal family. I mean, he was, kind of head of their security apparatus. He's very, very close to the CIA. So I would be a little hesitant to totally buy into the idea that he had been arrested. Interestingly, though, they say that in like Middle East Eye, I believe, and some of these other reports to say at least that he's being looked at as part of this corruption probe. That this is going all the way back to the Yamamya deal, which is a huge arms deal that was negotiated between the United Kingdom and Saudi Arabia back in the 80s, I think, under Thatcher. And of course, Prince Bandar was paid very, very well. He bought essentially like an entire town in England, like in some, gorgeous little countryside estate or something. I mean, it wasn't just like a land. I mean, he bought the entire town and I guess turned it into, his own town. I'm not sure exactly. Huge sums of money, in this arms deal. And they say that that's what they're looking at in terms of Bandar. Find that a little bit odd. That's really kind of going a long way back. And if bin Salman wants to go that far back, he's going to find that, his own father, the king of Saudi Arabia, was involved in all sorts of corruption and stuff. But anyway, all these people were sort of just, rounded up. We've got at least one member of the royal family was killed in a shootout. And then another one died in a very mysterious, I think it was a helicopter, but it might have been a small plane, but a crash. And I think this was actually on or near the border with Yemen. Now, this is, all seems pretty straightforward, albeit a bit, kind of insane, for the kingdom of Saudi Arabia to be going through this. I mean, this isn't the first time that we've seen, authoritarian governments go through purges or even, coup d'etats and things like that. It's certainly, the norm in much of the Middle East. But, in terms of Saudi Arabia, one of the kind of pillars of the Saudi government, is this sort of, adherence to the idea that, all of these sort of, the political squabbles and stuff, people might be vying for power internally and stuff, but that there should always be cohesion amongst the royal family, that should never kind of spill over into the, the public realm as it has with this very public, purge of political rivals. That is a bit new for Saudi Arabia. That doesn't really happen. There's not really, even when there have been, kings and stuff like that have been sort of forced to resign or abdicate, it was always done, with a smile, and sort of positive platitudes coming from whoever was pushing them out. Whereas Mohammed bin Salman is, he's all smiles because, every picture of him, he has this stupid smirk on his face. You can just tell this guy has no idea what's really going on. But this is unprecedented to be locking up these people. Now, of course, the spin that we get from much of the establishment here in the West with this is that this is wonderful, that this is actually a good thing, that Saudi Arabia has been begging for change and political reforms, and that MBS is actually going to offer them. And I sort of tried to get some, I don't know if they were really like well-rounded viewpoints, but I was watching like France 24's coverage of this with their experts, and then I watched Al Jazeera's and I watched Press TV's, so not necessarily the most diverse group of opinions, but for the most part, all of the they were either Western pundits or they were Arab pundits that were obviously quite favorable to the Saudis. They all portrayed Mohammed bin Salman as this sort of the just prince. That was a term that they used a lot. Or the sort of progressive leader that's going to change things. And they all point to his Vision 2030, which is his very grandiose scheme to modernize Saudi Arabia, to get them off reliance on oil and, these, as I said, these very sort of grand, ambitious plans that they're going to, they're going to have, wind power all over Saudi Arabia, and it's going to be this green revolution going on, in terms of energy, and women are going to drive cars, and maybe they'll bring movie theaters to Saudi Arabia. People won't have to drive to Bahrain anymore to go see a movie. And this is progressive. This is and this is going to happen, in like 10 plus years. Maybe this is going to happen. Whereas, I'm sure that, many of these reforms and things could be implemented much quicker than that. But for whatever reason, this is how the West is sort of portraying Mohammed bin Salman as this, progressive champion. They kind of, while it was his father, the King Salman, who, signed whatever royal decree allowing women to drive cars, of course, next year, not right now. Which I guess, I don't know. They say, well, it's because they have to learn. They've got to teach all these women how to drive cars. I mean, I don't know quite. I don't know why it's going to take them a year to learn how to drive a car. And it's going to be difficult with the license. I mean, they could do it. It's not, it's not that different. It's like, I don't know. There are lots of men that don't know how to drive that get licenses in Saudi Arabia. But anyway. This whole women driving, which was again touted as this finally, oh my God, is historic moment, which is so pathetic that's considered historic in the Kingdom of Saud. But anyway, that initiative, the sort of scuttlebutt with all that was really kind of Mohammed bin Salman. He was pushing for it. Again, he's this progressive champion, and there is some truth to the fact that, of course, the Saudi government is ultra corrupt. You're talking about, if they were any other family, they'd be, like in the U.S., they'd be hillbillies. This inbred, or they would be like the Roosevelts or something. They're all marrying each other's cousins and stuff like that. But yeah, they're this, degenerate, disgusting, super wealthy, very corrupt. They preach all of these morals and religious things and stuff in Saudi Arabia. And then they go to, the French Riviera and, with all these scantily clad, escorts and things like that. It's all fine. And there are people in Saudi Arabia, even with all this wealth, starving. These guys are eating, gourmet meals that, flown in from Italy and France and stuff. But anyway, MBS is, he's the good guy. He's this reformer and stuff. Now, what they kind of shy away from while they're talking about these economic and supposed social political reforms is the fact that Mohammed bin Salman was the architect of this war in Yemen, which is unraveling to such a crazy degree right now. And I think I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we've got this famine that is just, God only knows what's going to happen there. But, Salman was, the architect of that and is still sort of, doing that. And, beyond the sort of internal politics and the squabbles and stuff that are happening with Saudi Arabia and all these things, in terms of the battle between the different family members and stuff like that. The real story kind of lies in the fact that amidst this, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Said Hariri, was summoned to Riyadh and resigned. He was and the working theory is that he was forced to resign by his puppet masters in Saudi Arabia. And I don't think this is not like a theory or anything like that. There's no reason for Hariri to resign. He was not necessarily the most loved politician in Lebanon, but he was still the prime minister. And usually, when a prime minister resigns, they don't fly to a foreign country that acts as their, financial backer and political backer, and resigns in the most, uncomfortable video you've ever seen of Said Hariri. Now, he says that this is over concerns for himself and his family's safety because of Hezbollah, and by default Iran. And I think he even might have mentioned Iran by name in the resignation. But, the idea is that, the Iranians are, they're going to try and kill him through their proxy force of Hezbollah. For people that don't know, Hezbollah is part of the ruling government in Lebanon right now. They've gained tremendous influence, not even just amongst the Shia population, but I'm not sure if it's the president or the deputy prime minister, but Michael Aoun, who's a Christian political leader in Lebanon, he is a supporter, and he's in the government. He has sort of, he's aligned with Hezbollah, so that Hezbollah is even reaching out with the Christian community. There are Sunnis that support Hezbollah. I mean, Hezbollah has been able to achieve a much wider political influence across Lebanon, plus while maintaining a very strong military wing as well. And this, of course, is anathema for the Saudis. Basically at this point, So there's this, they're going to kill him. They're going to kill him. And a lot of this is like this bogus assassination attempt that, Al Arabiya and a few other outlets in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf were promoting, that Hezbollah was, they were about to assassinate Hariri, or that there was a plan in the works. And the Saudis, I guess, helped thwart it, because that's why they summoned Hariri there. It should be of note that the Lebanese security services have denied this. They said that this is the first they've heard of a assassination attempt by Hezbollah against Hariri. I don't even know why Hezbollah would want to assassinate Hariri at this point. I don't think they'd have much to gain from that. All it would do would be to bring attention to Hariri's, family's legacy. His father was assassinated. It's widely believed that Hezbollah was behind it, or at least participated in this assassination. But that's for another episode. So I don't know what they would really gain out of that. But anyway, that's the idea that's being kind of put out there. And for right now, the common belief is that Hariri is being held prisoner in Saudi Arabia. So much so that he had to go on TV yesterday. I think it was on Future TV, which is a Saudi outlet, and he gave another one of these very stiff, uncomfortable wooden interviews where you can see him looking off camera at his handlers, looking for, what's the response I should be giving, basically saying, no, I'm not being held prisoner, everything is fine, I'm free to leave whenever I want to. I believe the last sort of quote I saw on this was Hariri saying he's fine, and that he's going to be returning to Lebanon in 2 days. So we'll have to see about that. And maybe he might at this point, because the pushback is so intense, and that the Saudis might have to let him go, and return to Beirut, but we'll have to wait and see. But all the same, even Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, is asking that Hariri return. And Nasrallah, I think the Saudis anticipated that if they had Hariri resign, that then Hezbollah would give, or Nasrallah in particular, would give a fiery speech where he's yelling and going on and on about the evil Saudis and these things. And instead, Nasrallah gave a much more kind of a reserved speech about this, and basically said that, in so many words, that while him and Hariri are not friends, or or not on the best of terms, that he still believes that Hariri should come here, and if he wants to resign, he should resign, in the legal constitutional way that Lebanon has in place for a resignation, which is you have to present your resignation to the parliament, I believe, and they have to accept it, formally. You don't do it from an undisclosed location in Riyadh, and then you're not able to leave. And of course, Nasrallah and many others don't believe that they believe that this is being forced, that Hariri did not want to resign, and that he was basically being forced into this. And this has backfired a bit for the Saudis. There's been now, I think their idea might have been to sort of create chaos, that this would unfold, that people would start, vying for power and whatnot, and that would weaken Lebanon and possibly set it up for some sort of a small war or armed confrontation that we'll get to in a minute. But this seems to have not really been quite the case. This has sort of backfired to the point where, Hariri has now stated he's going to be returning in a few days. So, if he doesn't, that's not going to bode well for the Saudis and their other, puppets in Lebanon. And there have been some other people that have sort of, moved up and become vocal that that basically, talking about how wonderful Saudi Arabia is, politicians in Lebanon doing this. And they've sort of stepped into what they think are going to be Hariri's shoes. But even that is sort of backfired. And if anything, it is sort of united, for the most part, much of the population in Lebanon, regardless of political affiliation or where they stand on Saudi Arabia or Hariri or Hezbollah or Iran or any of these things. They've all kind of come around and asked that Hariri return, that he has to be able to return, that he can't, that Saudi Arabia has to stop kind of holding him hostage or whatnot. And many of them have kind of rejected the very intense warlike rhetoric coming out of Saudi Arabia, targeted at Lebanon. So, for instance, I believe it was just after Hariri resigned, Saudi Arabia said that that Hezbollah had declared war on Saudi Arabia. According to Hezbollah, this is the first they've ever heard of it. They don't know why. They haven't declared war. And Saudi Arabia insisted that all Saudi citizens in Lebanon return immediately to Saudi Arabia because Hezbollah had declared war on Saudi Arabia. So again, kind of upping the ante. And I think, looking at it from from over here in the U.S., this is much more about kind of creating a climate where things could sort of escalate, So they've declared war and everyone's sort of fighting and whatnot. And it appears that Saudi Arabia has been liaising, not even so secretly, with Israel over this. And this comes from a leaked Israeli cable that Channel 10, which is an outlet in Israel, first reported on, that they obtained this cable. This was like Israel's foreign ministry. This was a direct cable to all overseas embassies to instruct them to lobby their host countries in support of Saudi Arabia's efforts to destabilize Lebanon. So this is not hearsay. This is not a conspiracy theory. This isn't fake news or anything like that. This is a real Israeli cable. So, and you kind of have to assume that Israel was okay with this coming out. Speaking, especially if Channel 10 is getting a copy of it, if it's a direct order to the various embassies to support Saudi Arabia, they know that that's going to get out. It's kind of, you can't really hide that. It's not an action that you can kind of do in the shadows or something like that. Sorry, just taking a little sip of water there. But this essentially confirms that the budding relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel is now kind of open. Is not only real, but it's now kind of okay to openly discuss. And again, this started originally, this sort of story, there were people making analysis that with Hariri resigning, with the sort of pressure that Saudi Arabia was exerting on Lebanon and about Iran and Hezbollah and this stuff, that, maybe Israel was going to use this as some sort of a pretext to sort of attack Hezbollah. And then lo and behold, Netanyahu sends out a cable instructing the, various ambassadors and embassy officials in all over the world to lobby their host countries in support of Saudi Arabia's actions to start a war in Lebanon. Now, this I would say lends more and more credence to the rumors circulating that Israel is about to go to war, or is at least about to strike Hezbollah or do something like that. Now, and again, too, when you've got the Saudis sort of saying that Hezbollah's already kind of declared war for them and stuff like that, it does make you think. Now, I don't want to jump to any kind of conclusions or anything like this. There's a lot of this is a very fluid situation, as you can see with the Hariri stuff. It appears as if Mohammed bin Salman and his cronies might have overthought this, or they might have, not, I don't know, that they might have just, misjudged the situation a little bit. So who knows? This might be changing. But I will say that there is a belief amongst a lot of the Lebanese public that something is going to happen. And when Saudi Arabia is essentially now, then here's the thing. If first off, Israel attacking Hezbollah, it's nothing new. They do this all the time. They love it. The Israeli public loves it. Even when it's even when Israel sort of loses, quote unquote, in those sort of fights, they win. With the popular support back at home. It should be noted, too, Netanyahu is going through his own political problems. He's been in power for quite some time, so he's definitely made a lot of enemies. There are a lot of people that are not thrilled with Netanyahu. His wife is roped up in a corruption scandal in Israel. There's a lot of there's some internal issues in Israel right now over the Orthodox or settler community in Israel. That there are calls in the Knesset to require them to serve in the military, and they don't want to. There's a lot of pushback with that. There's pushback that many of these the sort of settler community type people by and large are sort of feeding off of the the welfare state of Israel, while not really contributing much to the economy or anything like that. So there are some intense political things going on right now in Israel. Not to mention all the stuff that they've increased settlements. They've essentially made it clear that there will be no nothing is going to happen vis-a-vis Palestine, at least under Trump, for the foreseeable future. And Israel has basically stated that, they're not going to work on a peace plan. They're not going to work on an idea of a two-state or a one-state solution. They're just essentially going to keep carving up Palestine. And this is, this is this sort of, I don't know if irony is the right word, but, they don't want to, they don't want to take over Palestine, but they want to continue to occupy it. So basically, they're just going to continue using it as their sort of colonial outpost until eventually all of the Palestinians are driven out or killed or whatever, and then Israel will pretend like, oh well, we were always here, and this is just always our land, and that's it. That's the end of it. So a lot of political pressures on Netanyahu and his administration. So what better than a nice little war with our arch enemy Hezbollah, aka Iran. And this also kind of fits in line with the mounting calls that mostly by Donald Trump, but to a lesser extent the Gulf countries and Israel, that Iran is not compliant with the deal, that whatever they're following it, but not I don't know, their behavior isn't good. These sort of stupid reasons that they've come up with for getting rid of the nuclear deal, pushing that more and more. That, of course, kind of feeds into this Iran. We have to confront Iran. How are we going to do this? Well, we could do this in Lebanon. And Lebanon has long been used as a sort of proxy battleground for all sorts of different state actors within the Middle East. So, and predominantly we're talking about either Israel and Saudi Arabia, or Saudi Arabia and Israel, and Iran, Hezbollah, and this sort of, and of course, to a lesser extent, the U.S. is of course, not maybe to a lesser extent, the U.S. is invested in all of this as well. So Lebanon has long been used as a battleground for here, and there seems to be a belief amongst a large swath of the population there that that's about to happen again. So they are very kind of freaked out by this, and I think you can. There's evidence by the fact that the population seems to be kind of uniting behind this idea that Hariri should return. This sort of war of words should be de-escalated. People should kind of calm down, sit down, and sort of think about this before Saudi Arabia basically uses this as an excuse to have their confrontation with Iran and try and weaken them. And that is what this really is all about. And I think that this political purge in Saudi Arabia is less about it has nothing to do with fighting corruption, social reforms like giving the women the right to drive a car. Again, they'll still have to wear a veil, I assume. They still won't have any other political rights or civil liberties or things like that, but they could drive a car or whatever. And it really has nothing to do with that or this Vision 2030 plan. That, I think, is really a smokescreen. That is the plan that you use to sell to people in the West, particularly policymakers, that then kind of spin that and sell that and dress it up to their domestic populations to say, oh, you see, look, he's actually a reformer. This is how it works. Even though it is an absolute monarchy, it's not like MBS is asking for true democratic reforms or electing a president or a prime minister or having some sort of independent body of politicians that might have some sort of power or anything. No. It's still about him being an absolute monarch and ruling the country however he sees fit. But they can sell this as these are the steps that it takes. This is what happens. Blah blah blah. Anyway, this really is about confronting Iran, and of course. Mohammed bin Salman can use this as an excuse or a pretext for getting rid of any political rivals that he has in the process. And I'm sure in the coming weeks and months, we're going to see, accusations that, such and such was connected to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, or they were taking money from Iran. I mean, that's got to be, in the works. I'm sure they're going to kind of trounce that out at some point because it's such an easy thing. And again, you can whip up this hysteria. Oh my God. You see, I mean, I don't think it's totally a coincidence that this is happening. This purge and this sort of war talk against Iran is happening around the same time that these infamous documents were released about Osama bin Laden, and these I believe are mostly from Abbottabad, the complex there. There's like thousands of documents. I think like Long War Journal, of course, has been covering this, so you can check out their stuff on this, but. This is, the CIA has declassified or allowed the release of a bunch of these, and I think there's going to be more to come. But Of course, the headline that jumps out is that Iran and Al-Qaeda were in cahoots together. That Iran and Al-Qaeda are best friends, that Osama bin Laden was close with the Iranians, Al-Qaeda's with the Iranians, therefore, Iran is the ultimate evil. This is wonderful PR to use. And they can spin this, and I don't think it's a total, coincidence that these documents get released, and then Saudi Arabia kind of ups the ante with Iran. And again, now we're linking everything back to Iran. Al-Qaeda, instability in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and of course, Yemen. The disastrous war in Yemen, which is only getting worse. And as I said, we've got this catastrophic famine that, it's happening. It's not like it's about to happen. It is happening. And this is, of course, because Iran is using the Houthis to destabilize Yemen and, I guess, threaten Saudi Arabia. And I've talked about this before on the show and on interviews and things like that. Yes, Iran has definitely given money to the Houthis and military support and, arms and things like that, and I assume training. But that is a little exaggerated by the Western media. The Houthis are not a Iranian proxy. The Houthis existed well before Iran got involved with them, and I think it's a little disingenuous to assume that they are proxies of Iran, because that sort of, again, that dismisses the idea that the Houthis have lots of legitimate grievances. That they are a true political force that needs to be at the negotiating table, whether you like them or not. They're not gone. The military might of Saudi Arabia has not been able to defeat the Houthis or any of the other major factions in Yemen, and of course, Mansour al-Hadi, the puppet president of Yemen, who was Hillary Clinton's pick. He's in Saudi Arabia, So I mean, it all comes back to Saudi Arabia ultimately. But as I was saying, the issue in Yemen is of course related to this fight between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that is again another proxy sort of fight. Not quite the same with Lebanon, but that's a similar sort of an idea there. Now, lot of stuff to kind of unpack there. I understand I just sort of threw a lot of information there, and there'll be links and stuff in the show notes. If so definitely check that out. But I think I've done an okay job of kind of painting this picture that we see unfolding, whereby Saudi Arabia is kind of using Lebanon and Yemen in their fight against the Iranians, and is using them as a battleground to fight Saudi Arabia. To fight Iran. I think that this is illustrative of the larger sort of battle that's going on in that region, and the lengths to which Saudi Arabia is willing to go in order to confront Iran. Now, I don't want to paint Iran as some sort of part of this, axis against Western oppression and dominance and NATO. I think there is some truth to that. I think Iran is can act as a check against, this sort of, chaos and oppression that Saudi Arabia and the West love to sow all over the Middle East. But obviously, Iran is not, they're no angel in this either. And obviously, again, Iran wants to be the dominant political force here. It's not like Iran is not doing this in order to be, like I said, I talked about this on Chuck's show last week. No foreign country does something or gets involved in another country for benevolent needs. Like I use the example of like China is not in Africa because they want to help the African people. Like China doesn't have a military base in Djibouti because they want to protect the people of Djibouti. No, of course not. China's not building roads and things like that in Sudan and certainly all over West Africa. They're not importing cheap-made Chinese goods in order to benefit West Africans. That's not really what's at play here. So again, Iran wants to be a regional power. They want to have political, economic, military dominance as well. And much of this is also predicated on that in terms of these proposed pipelines, like the Iran-Iraq-Syria pipeline, which is a big one. Again, if Saudi Arabia is so, Mohammed bin Salman is all about wind power and renewable energies. What does he care if Iran wants to build this pipeline? Although they seem very concerned about the idea of this happening. But, either way, Iran is, we don't have to take sides in this, but I think we can see why there are people that are going to Iran when it's sort of like your other option is a psychotic Wahhabi royal family in Saudi Arabia. But my sort of larger thing that I want to explore here, as we're fast now running out of time. I thought I wouldn't run out of time. But is this the foreign policy that Donald Trump brings to the table? Now I know we've basically spent most of this hour talking about all these other countries. We haven't really mentioned Donald Trump and the U.S. But I think this is the kind of foreign policy that we can expect, and come to know and love from the dear leader Trump. And this all sounds very neoconservative to me. And remember, Trump was the anti-neocon. Trump is he knows the dangers of the neocons. He's not going to let them run his government. Even though he loves Rudy Giuliani, John Bolton, all of these other psychos. Michael Flynn, big neocon, wrote a book with one of the worst neocons, Michael Ledeen. But no, Trump's not a neocon, and don't worry about this. But this whole, sorry, my throat is killing me there. This all seems like a neocon wet dream, that we're going to have some sort of a confrontation with Saudi Arabia. We're gonna take it to Hezbollah. We're gonna finally kind of tell them who's boss. We're gonna revamp the whole Middle East. Saudi Arabia will, continue to make the oil flow for us. All these sort of things. This is all, and of course the idea too is, well, we'll take down Lebanon. We'll destabilize Lebanon. We'll take out Hezbollah. That will, of course, weaken Syria, who is very reliant on Iran and Hezbollah at the moment, to fight ISIS and these other groups. So that'll weaken Syria. Maybe we can finally, fuck with Syria and get rid of Assad, and then we can redo Syria however we see fit. This is all neocon talking points. This is all wonderful, and it will all lead up to the eventual, I don't know what, the green revolution in Iran. I don't know. Maybe we'll bring back the Shah, or we'll nuke them into the Stone Age. Whatever. But this is all very neoconservative, and this seems to be what Trump is bringing to the table. Because, Trump has nothing to say on any of this other than, some occasional praise on Twitter. So, either Trump is so detached from reality that foreign leaders like Mohammed bin Salman can just kind of do whatever they want, or he really is kind of fine with all of this so long as he gets his beak wet. And, I mean that in a very literal sense, because remember when our dear leader promised that he would never bow down to those terrorists supporting Saudis, and he slammed Hillary Clinton, who was a big Saudi proponent, and Trump was never going to bow down to, he kept saying that, never bow down to them. And then, of course, on his first official visit as president anywhere in the world, he picked Saudi Arabia to go. All right. And instead of bowing, he curtsied like a little schoolgirl in front of the Queen when King Salman gave him some award or whatever. And you look at the video. Well, during that visit, where Trump was wined and dined, and they all over Riyadh and Jeddah and any places he went, these huge billboards with his face on them, and next to the king, and they totally knew how to just get their way with this. You just praise this fat fuck, and oh, he's so wonderful, he's so smart and genius, blah blah blah. Again, this is not going to bow down to those terrorists supporting Saudis, all this stuff. During that visit, according to a Saudi whistleblower, Mujahideen, and I'm sure I'm butchering that, but he's a Twitter, he has a Twitter account. He's fairly well known as a quote, Saudi whistleblower. Some of his stuff is accurate, some of it's not so. So, take it with a grain of salt. But he is a big deal. He's quoted in, even the mainstream media listens to this guy, as well as the alternative. During that visit, Mujahideen claims that Mohammed bin Salman personally bribed Donald Trump with $1 billion. Now that figure seems a little high, although it's not out of the realm. They make over $1 billion a day with oil, so it's not crazy to think that. But this is what he says, that during that visit, a yacht that was indirectly owned by the Trump organization docked in Jeddah, under armed guard or whatever, and it was sort of all very kind of secretive and low profile. But it docked in Jeddah, and then bin Salman, his cronies, loaded up this yacht with $1 billion, and then the yacht went away, probably to Cyprus. Which seems to be, and to the Cyprus Bank, which seems to be where a lot of Trump cronies like to put their money. So, now, what do we make of that story? $1 billion seems like a lot, not out of the realm of possibility. That figure might be inflated, but more importantly, the idea that that you could bribe Donald Trump with cash and get a favorable outcome is totally in the realm of possibilities. All presidents work like that. You know what I mean? Or all foreign leaders. You bribe them, yeah, you're going to get special things. That's just politicians in general. Okay? But this does follow a pattern when it comes to this president and this administration. And again, I'm not saying that everything in the Russia investigation is totally accurate, but it does seem as if there is some truth to a lot of these allegations, and a lot of it just stems to basic everyday graft that you could pay whoever, Donald Trump Jr., you could pay Michael Flynn, allegedly, $15 million, and he would go extradite Fethullah Gulen. All of these shady business deals that Jared Kushner has with Qatar and that Donald Trump has with all sorts of Saudis and stuff, with Russian billionaires funding various properties and stuff. It's all, this is what we've kind of come to know of Donald Trump's administration. They are as corrupt as everyone else, and they're just a little bit more blatant about it. So the idea that Donald Trump comes to Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman bribes him with $1 billion or whatever, bribes him with money, bribes him with cash on a yacht, puts it on a yacht. And then, what happened after that? Well, Saudi Arabia, says that Qatar is working with the Iranians, and we've got to have a blockade against Qatar. That's still going on. It hasn't worked quite the way they wanted it to, but all the same, Iran and Qatar, they're, part of this greater cabal and with Al-Qaeda and whatnot. We see the gloves really coming off in terms of Yemen, an uptick in the violence in Yemen, an exacerbation of the famine. There's about to be a huge cholera epidemic going on in Yemen. All of this follows after Donald Trump, goes to Saudi Arabia, where he's praised, in the way that he wishes all Americans here would praise him and his administration. And we've heard nothing from Trump about any of this. All he gave like 2 tweets where he basically said, I'll link up to them in the show notes. But, I think everything that's going on in Saudi Arabia is great. It's wonderful. I have total faith in the king and in his son. And he said, all those that were, doing this or that are being treated harshly have been milking the system for years. And for whatever reason, he put milking in quotes. I don't know if he thought, I'm not sure if he quite understands the idea of using quotes. Was he confused? Did he think that people would think, that they were literally milking cows? I don't know why he put them in quotes, but, just again, another wonderful example of the mental, capacity of this fucking moron. But anyway, this seems to fit the pattern. All you gotta do is ensure Donald Trump, he's got the biggest dick in the room, grease his palms, and you're basically set. You can do whatever you want. And I would argue that this appears to be what happened in Saudi Arabia. And the fact that this isn't a larger scandal is preposterous to me. They nitpick Jeff Sessions, with testifying today. They nitpick every little statement that he said. I'm not saying it's not as unimportant, but, what Sessions may or may not have said to Carter Page or any of these other people about Russians and Russian interference and stuff, to me, seems secondary to the idea that Donald Trump goes to Saudi Arabia and is either bribed outright or is just so flattered, okay, by Mohammed bin Salman and his supposedly father who's suffering dementia. But he's so flattered by them that maybe they don't even need to give him money. They just need to put his poster up everywhere. That then he allows Saudi Arabia to basically almost declare war on Qatar, destroy Yemen even further, and then basically screw with Lebanon's internal politics, okay, and possibly move the pieces in place for an Israeli or some sort of a military confrontation in Lebanon as a proxy war against Iran. That Donald Trump is basically allowing for all of this is, just insane. It's psychotic that we've now come to this level. And Donald Trump could end all of this. He could end the war in Yemen. He could make the Saudis stop doing this. All of this could be taken care of, with a phone call from Donald Trump, unless he really isn't as powerful as he claims to be. And maybe that is true. Maybe he can't do it because he's so, up his own ass, or he's so detached from reality and so compartmentalized from the day-to-day operations that are going on that maybe he can't. In which case, I don't know, that might even be scarier. But anyway, now I'm just kind of ranting and yelling and whatnot. And of course, I'm losing my voice as we speak. But I just want to say that all of this seems very indicative of the behavior that we've come to know of Donald Trump. Okay, one story here and there, all right, maybe you can kind of let that pass. But when you've got now, it's multiple instances where it seems like as long as money is changing hands, you can kind of do whatever you want. Now, I'm not saying this is new. It's not. But this administration is just so bad at covering it up. It almost doesn't matter, like, oh, well, they all do it, okay? Because who cares about that? He's the president now, okay? Yemen is about to disintegrate, okay? There's no functioning government. It's basically a bunch of warring factions with what the UN describes as the worst famine we're going to see in decades, plus cholera. People are going to be dying en masse from diarrhea. Diarrhea is not even a disease or a sickness. You know what I mean? It's a lot of that is just clean water can cure all that. You're going to start seeing people dying all over Yemen. Yemen is going to fall apart. And anyway, we're at the break. So next week, I will have my interview with John Atack. So thank you all for listening, and I will be talking to you very soon.
No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me in American Freedom Radio. Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys because they have all the technology. They have all these great things that they're going to do. But obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Tell the truth. Don't be bullshitting people. There's enough bullshit as it is. In fact, there's just enough. Did you know that? There's just enough bullshit to hold things together in this country. Bullshit is the glue that binds us as a nation. Where would we be without our safe, familiar American bullshit? Land of the free, home of the brave, the American dream. All men are equal, justice is blind, the press is free, your vote counts. Business is honest, the good guys win, the police are on your side, God is watching you, your standard of living will never decline, and everything is gonna be just fine. The official national bullshit story. I call it the American okey doke.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, rocket copy. 4, 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.